one of these ones? Here, I'll get you this one at the end here. All right, well, let's get started in here, everybody. I know a couple people are still coming in. We have a wide spread of things to talk about today, in the Old Testament especially, because last week we got like the first chapter, maybe the first chapter and a half of Ecclesiastes, and I said we're going to hold off on that till this week. So we've got Ecclesiastes to talk about. And it's got a whole vibe behind it, I guess you could say. Ecclesiastes definitely has its own vibe. But then we finished up Ecclesiastes pretty quick because it's short and simple. And then we hopped into Song of Songs, or Song of Solomon, which is a whole other different vibe. And actually, if we get there today, we actually looked at a little bit of Isaiah this week too. So we've kind of been all over the place, especially when it comes to the Old Testament. But let's start off where we kind of started last week, but we didn't talk about it, the book of Ecclesiastes. I don't have a Bryce or a Greg today, so raise your hand if you have comments, and I'll bring you the microphone. What would you say, before we even get into my little summary of Ecclesiastes, what is the tone of Ecclesiastes? Depressing. Life is pointless. Oh my goodness. Ecclesiastes, right? Just kind of a depressing book to read. Where was the last time you ever heard somebody quote Ecclesiastes? Last Saturday? Okay, I'll dig into that a little more. Do you have... Yeah? We'll talk about that in a second. Larry said, when was the last time you heard it quote? He said last Saturday. What was last Saturday for you, Larry?
Well, we did a memorial for my nephew in the Bighorns last Sunday. And one of the applicable and appropriate verses was in Ecclesiastes chapter 3, 1 through 8, where it talks about there's a time for everything.
Yep. That is probably the most frequent quote you'll hear from Ecclesiastes is probably in a memorial, right? There's a time to live, there's a time to die, there's a time to rejoice and dance, and there's a time for sorrow, right? Depending what version you're reading it out of. Yeah, the vibe of Ecclesiastes, the tone, I guess you could say, is a life is tough and rough, and that's just how it is kind of book. As far as it, kind of a little bit of background on the book of Ecclesiastes, most people think that Solomon wrote it. But again, that is a most people think. I wouldn't say that's a 100% guarantee, but I think that's a pretty safe bet. When we get into the Song of Solomon next, here in a second, I have probably a less percentage guarantee that that's Solomon. But for the most part, the by and large perspective on both of these books is that they're from Solomon in some form or factor.
Well, the very first verse says, the words of the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem.
Yeah. And that's, so some of the debate is, on Ecclesiastes, I don't think it's much of a debate. I think it's Solomon. But when we get to Song of Solomon, was he the one that actually wrote it, or did he just compile it? So that's why I'm saying that. I think Ecclesiastes is a better 100% closer than Song of Solomon. That's just my opinion. But yeah, profound, I don't know if profound is the right word, deep thoughts into the meaning of life and the human condition. Kind of a sad look at everything. The author, declares that everything is meaningless and vanity and everything is temporary and fleeting in this life, which is a depressing perspective, but from a godly perspective, it doesn't necessarily have to be depressing, right? And so we kind of get a weird mix of those things throughout this book, because it looks like a righteous, like Solomon, righteous man before God is saying these things, but he's saying them in such a way that it's almost depressing to read. But we know that if you're with God, the inevitability of death, which is what this whole book is about, isn't a scary thing, it's a positive thing, right? So I think that's a good way to look at it. Ultimately, when we get to the conclusion of Ecclesiastes, and I'll open it up to your guys' thoughts, but I think if you look at the whole book as a whole, from the beginning where things are really rough to the end, I think the conclusion really points that their fulfillment can only be found in truly serving God. It can't be found in wealth. It can't be found in life. It can't be found in family. It can't be found in success. It can only be found in things that are beyond this world, and that thing is righteousness in God. And so I think that's what the take-home should be. After looking at all the pointless and all the meaningless things, the take-home should be, you got to find your hope in God. What are your guys' thoughts on Ecclesiastes? I'll pass the basket around too, because I totally forgot to do that. All right. Did you have one, Dennis? I'll go Dennis, and then you can hand it to Nancy.
Just kind of a general one. We got to keep in mind that the early Christians, they didn't have the book of Philemon and 2 Thessalonians and all those, even Acts, probably not even Matthew, Mark. And this is the stuff they read. And Paul said, Timothy, stay strong in those scriptures you learned from a babe, from your mom and grandma, and it would have been these kind of books. And so I think it's universal, eternal wisdom for mankind, not just, that was for the Jews till the cross happened. I think that's a real bad idea some people have, but these are eternal ideas that God shared with us, man.
Absolutely. I think that's Nancy, Dennis is going to hand you the mic, but I think that's a very valuable point. These weren't just for the nation of Israel to review until Christ came. No, I think this is wisdom for all of mankind forever, right? And if you look at the big picture of it, that's what I think is the important part to take away from Ecclesiastes. A life with God is not hopeless, even though life itself is hopeless. That can be encouraging to all people of all times, right? Nancy?
Well, also, there's nothing new under the sun. That's said all the time.
Yeah, we
right
do.
There.
We quote that one a lot. Yeah, you're right.
And he talks. I mean, I just love this book. There's so much information in it. He talks about the wind and the sea and how the seas are always emptying into the sea. How the rivers are always emptying into seas, but the rivers are never. The seas are never full and the rivers are never empty. That's the whole water cycle. And then it's in Ecclesiastics where he talks about how he toils and he enjoys his toil and then he says, but I don't even know that after me if it's going to be taken care of. And I was like, yeah, you're right, Solomon. It's not taken care of. The whole temple is just looted.
Yep. And again, looking at the physical time place, it's just another good example of how everything in this life can just fade away. It's just temporary, right? Absolutely.
I was thinking to myself, I work, and then what's going to happen? My kids probably just let it go to seed. And
Yeah. All right, Courtney?
So, wisdom literature in the Bible typically is the 3 books, Proverbs, Job, and Ecclesiastes. And I really liked, it was described to me once as Proverbs is the school teacher. She says 2 + 2 is 4. Wear your seatbelts, But Ecclesiastes is wear your seatbelt, but sometimes you get in a car crash and you die. It's the absurdity of life. And I think that's very valuable. I think a lot of times we say if you've got depression, go to Psalms and it'll cheer you up. It's like, well, why don't you go to Ecclesiastes and get that hurt out? We've all felt that. We've all felt like slaves at our job. We've all felt the absurdity of life, but it doesn't end on that note. I mean, it kind of does, but it talks about enjoy the love of your life as long as you live, and wisdom is better than folly, even if though it doesn't give you a perfect life. It talks about remembering your Creator And those are very valuable things, regardless of the absurdity.
Yeah. I don't know if I would advise someone who's depressed to read Ecclesiastes. I do remember going through our wisdom literature section at Sunset. I think we actually said something like that, like, okay, if somebody's depressed, don't send them to Ecclesiastes. If you read it from a depressed standpoint, all you see is the depressing things, right? If you read it from a righteous, godly standpoint, you can see the depressing world around you is nothing compared to what you have in God. And so I think it all comes down to your perspective, but I think that is the take home that we, as like Dennis was saying, not just the nation of Israel, but us as Christians still to this day should hold on fast to. Did you have a comment, Jordan? It's meaningless. Life is meaningless.
I suppose it depends on why you're depressed, but Ecclesiastes 9:11, Solomon says, "The race is not to the swift, or the battle to the strong, nor does food come to the wise, or wealth to the brilliant, or favor to the learned, but time and chance happen to them all." There is something comforting about the fact of no matter what kind of life you're living, stuff's going to happen. And it's not because you were or weren't swift, and it wasn't because you were or weren't strong. It's just time and chance.
Kind of the idea, I've mentioned it multiple times in sermons and whatnot, you will never be good enough on your own, right? You will never achieve enough in this life. You got to have God. You got to have the righteousness of God on your side to really achieve anything. Like Nancy was saying, you could save up all the money in the world and build all of the temples and whatever you want to call your life, and at the end of the day, it'll never prevent life from happening and death from happening. Yeah, absolutely. Anything else on Ecclesiastes? Again, I kind of cruise quickly through it. Yeah, I'm coming to you, Dennis. Jordan, do you want to do microphone? Sure. Okay, Jordan's on it from here on out. Yes.
I think Ecclesiastes and, of course, Proverbs and ones like that, they just kind of help keep our feet on the ground. They are just lessons in realism, how it is, It's just, this is the way this world is, and he's helping us to face it. And I'll bet there's a lot of Christians, in fact, we read about them sometimes in history books, that early Christians, they thought the Lord was going to come back in weeks or months, maybe a couple years. They were living in such a way that they were kind of dancing on air, and then it didn't happen. In fact, they started getting horrible persecutions and everything, and they had got this notion that once you become a Christian, it's all cotton candy from there on. And Paul told Timothy later, hey, stay strong in those books you learned as a kid. That's where it's at. Yep. And so it's, I think they could help us keep our feet on the ground. I know sometimes we've all known people that they've had kind of a rough worldly life, and they or their parents or whatever were living in a lot of sin and everything, and life was rough. They thought when they were baptized things would all smooth out. Well, some of them do, but I'd say most of them don't. In fact, some may intensify. And I'd say Ecclesiastes, for example, would let you know that, in Proverbs.
Yeah, especially while the new life formation is taking place. And I was going to say, this is still true for us today as Christians, right? Some people really think that you become a Christian and it's all smooth sailing and roses from there. But the fact is, especially when you're getting started in Christianity, Satan's not happy about that. So he's going to try. That's always the thing that I want to share with somebody before they get baptized, is this is a big old target on your back now. And so life is going to become more difficult. Yeah, absolutely. Brenda's over there. Jordan is coming to you. He's the microphone guy now. He's on it.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. To me, I see Ecclesiastes as people chasing after happiness in the wrong places. Everybody thinks happiness is in this thing or that thing and not in God, and just getting your relationship with God correct, and the rest of things will fall into place. You may have lots of troubles, but at least you're right with God, and to me that's what Ecclesiastes is searching for happiness. To me, Song of Songs, they have found happiness.
Oh, I could get behind that second part. That's a good transition too. You guys ready to talk about Song of Songs? Ooh, okay. Last time I talked about Song of Songs, I got in trouble, so here we go. Okay, we take a big change, and I think Brenda's kind of hitting it on the head there. Ecclesiastes is searching the whole world for happiness and not finding it in the world. You got to find it in God, right? Song of Solomon. This is the one that I said I don't know if it's, I wouldn't put 100% guarantee on this one being written by Solomon. My commentary, my thought is, and it's maybe changing now because I read Song of Solomon again, I perceive that Solomon compiled this from a him and a her. Now, you read Song of Solomon, and she actually refers to Solomon. So I could be wrong on that. That's why I'm not putting a 100% guarantee if this is Solomon and his lovely lady, or if it's a lovely lady and a lovely man, and Solomon compiled them for his king's library. Okay? I don't know. Can't guarantee that. I actually I caught that whole message about Solomon, your garden, and all of that this time, and I was like, well, maybe it is Solomon, or maybe she's referring to the king's garden. I don't know. It didn't clear it up for me either way. So if you want to stand strong on the fact that this is indeed Solomon and his lovely lady, you sure can. I don't know. I really don't know. Song of Solomon. I'll open it up to, we already got a couple hands going, so that's good, because whatever I say is probably going to be put on blast. But it is a poetic, a lyrical, passionate love song. Is that fair? I think that's fair, right? We see basically, if you want to break it down like a song, we see verses from him and we see verses from her, back and forth, talking about how wonderful life is with each other, how wonderful each other are, how wonderful features of each other are, how wonderful the love of each other are. You can dig into all of those as much as you want. If you decide you want to pick your pickup lines out of Song of Solomon, good luck to you, because there's some interesting ones, right? But there is a lot of deep either imagery, allegory, or just kind of straight out loving tension there, right? We see a lot of this. So it's back and forth between them two. We see the bride starting off. She expresses her longing for her beloved man, right? And her desire to be with him. Then we see him respond with words of affection and admiration. As Courtney said this past week, you can tell he's a man and she's a woman because she's so like eloquent and beautiful. And he's like, look at our house, look how good the timbers are. And she's like, he's a man, right? But they go back and forth in their various ways, praising each other and describing each other's love one for another, using, again, vivid, poetic imagery like a song. We'll see if we get this in the discussion. If not, I have one more piece to talk about. So what are some things that you guys see or you might think about when it comes to the Song of Solomon or the Song of Songs? Go Nancy, and then we'll go Dennis right after that.
Well, I left my one-year Bible at home but somewhere in here she talks about it's her brother. This is a brother and sister.
I don't think
That's what it says in
like
here.
we think, though.
When here, oh, that you were like my brother who nursed at my mother's breasts.
Yes. Again, imagery that I don't think is
And
yeah.
I can't find it, but there's a place in here
I
where
can find
she
it
says,
for you.
"Oh, my brother," and I'm like, okay.
Yeah, I don't think that's the perspective that we're coming from that as an American reader. But I could see how that could trip us up a little bit, right? I think it's kind of this imagery of closeness. Also, there's just some, if you want to pick out weird things in the Song of Solomon that we wouldn't say today, man, you got a whole big list of it, right? Yes. Yeah. And again, I don't think they had the same mother like that. Was what I'm saying. Anyway. All right, Dennis.
I think Solomon's the bravest man that ever lived. to have 1,000 wives and stuff, and then just dedicate this to one of them. Man, what a risky undertaking. It's kind of interesting. You know, it sounds like it'd be the letter or book for a one totally satisfied one woman man. You know, maybe like we think of Boaz with Ruth. Here it is, Solomon.
Yeah, and we don't know exactly when Song of Solomon is existing. Yeah, it's, by the way, Nancy, it's chapter 8, verse 1 that Nancy was referring to me. Oh, that you were like a brother to me who nursed at my mother's breasts. If I found you outside, I would kiss you, and none would despise me. Again, Song of Solomon. Are we allowed to talk about this? But again, I think that imagery is not meaning that they're literal brothers and sisters. I just think it's a weird allegory that we wouldn't say or understand that much in our culture today. So let me ask you this, as Brenda gets the microphone, she might have a comment, but when is this taking place in their relationship? All? From flirtation, courtship, to after marriage for sure, right? We have some indicators of that. Okay, that's what I think of it too. But some people try to put this just in one box and say this is just after marriage, and I'm like, well, I know why you're trying to do that so you don't get into trouble with what they're doing, but I think this is kind of the story of their whole relationship from beginning to end. Go for it, Brenda.
I have to stir the pot.
Let's do it. This is a good book.
I love Song of Solomon. It's to me, it's all allegorical. To me, it's a telling about the church and Christ. It's all the relationship of Christ coming for his bride, the church. It talks about the bride on the couch with 60 men. The 60 men that was carrying the couch is 60 men from Adam to Jesus. There was exactly 60 men. The 80 concubines there's 80 men on the side of Mary from Adam to Joseph, or to there was exactly 80 men. It was all allegorical. Christ came, he worked, he served, he labored for us, and then he went away, and then he came back. The brothers and sisters are our brothers and sisters in the church. The wall is how we build people up. The fox is Satan that comes and tries to take us away. To me, it's all allegorical. To me, it's beautiful. To me, it's a relationship of love between me and God.
All right. I'm glad that Brenda stirred the pot because I figured somebody would on that one. We'll go Nancy next. Let me just make a quick comment because I think we can talk about this for a good while. Just hold on one second. What was I going to say here? So, why is this in our Bible? That question starts to get us down the path of what Brenda's thinking. And I don't know if I 100% agree this is a pretty prominent thought on the Song of Solomon, if this is about the coming of Christ, which I think it certainly can be. But if it's not, it's kind of a weird book to have in our Bible, right? Doesn't necessarily talk about God kind of like we're in Esther right now on Wednesday night. It doesn't talk about God so upfront and blatantly, but at the same time, if we think about it critically, it's maybe talking about not only God, but his son that's coming. So I think that's an interesting idea. Let's see what Nancy has to say here. It's connected, I'm presuming.
Yeah, when I was reading this, I thought, maybe this isn't really about a male and a female. Maybe this has something to do with the church or with God and his people and stuff. Maybe, but it's just so difficult. And now that Brenda, I was thinking that too. Maybe it's not just a love story about two people. It's something more in depth, more.
Okay. I like where Terry's going. I got to bring Terry up here because just her little teeny comment here is what I'm all about. Say it so everybody can hear you, Terry.
Why couldn't it be both?
Why couldn't it be both? Absolutely. That's kind of where I think I hang out on it, because if you hang out on one or the other too much, I think you're missing a point, right? So if you completely write off the fact that this is talking about the bride of Christ, his church, and Christ that is coming at this point, and you look at it from the Christian perspective, I think you're missing some depth if you miss that, right? I think there's some depth there that we can take home. If you don't do the other side of it, you're just writing off the fact that this might actually be a true love story back and forth, and I think it actually is that as well. I think the fact that I think this is used for both. That's Harold's perspective. I think you can teach really good lessons. I think this is what we've been so scared to do, and I'm still scared to do because I don't want to get in trouble. But I think you can teach really good lessons to people in all stages of relationships from the book of Song of Solomon. And those great lessons are like flirtatious lines. No, there's more than that to the Song of Solomon. There is this whole journey of a relationship. So if you start at the beginning of the book, don't go too far with those people that are first dating, but you can teach good lessons out of the first part of the book. And for somebody that's been married, you go to the end of the book and work backwards, and you have a lot of teaching abilities and talking points for a true good husband and wife team, and what that love should look like. So I don't always want to throw out the romance side of the Song of Solomon, but you probably won't see me giving another sermon on it for a while because it's a touchy subject, right? But I also don't, like Brenda was pointing out, I don't want to throw out the fact that I think this is allegorical and representative of the church and Christ. And at this time, when Solomon is either compiling or writing this, that is prophetic. That's not happened yet, right? And so that's really, really, I think that's both important. Go for it, Brenda. Yeah.
And there's a lot about Solomon we don't study, such as it says in the Kings, I believe, that Solomon wrote 1,005 songs. He wrote them himself. He wrote gobs of proverbs that was never recorded. He wrote all of these different things. He did a lot that was never recorded. He was a prophet in many ways. And we have a tendency to think of him just as a king instead of everything else that he was doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Very, very true. On the note of this wisdom literature that Courtney's talking about, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Solomon, wisdom literature. That's usually what they're classified as. And if you notice, through the one-year Bible, we've been doing a psalm and a proverb, or kind of a psalm and a proverb every day, depending how it's broken up. And so those have been scattered throughout the whole year. And we don't talk about them a lot because they're we just don't get the opportunity to talk about them. But that's why I'm pretty encouraged on Wednesdays here. Not this Wednesday, but next Wednesday, we're going to be cracking open the book of Proverbs. And it's probably going to be a good long study because there's a lot of nuggets of wisdom in the book of Proverbs. And so if that's something you're interested in, I think Wednesday nights is going to be a really, really good time to look at wisdom because Proverbs is full of it. In fact, the first 9 chapters talk about who and what wisdom is, right? And so we kind of start with the story and then we get the pieces of wisdom for the rest of the book. So that's just my little advertisement for Proverbs study on Wednesdays. Okay, I'm being careful with Song of Solomon or Song of Songs, either one. You can call it either one. I won't give you a bad time. All right, let's spend just a couple of minutes. We dipped into Isaiah just a little bit. Again, completely taking a very different shift yet again. This week has been a whole bunch of different places. So we started off with life is meaningless, death is sure to come, Ecclesiastes. Then we got to Song of Solomon. You are so beautiful. I love you so much. You're like our house built with great cedars. And then we hop over to Isaiah. Who's Isaiah? What's this book about? Nancy?
He's the son of Amos. Ahaz, and he during the time of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, kings of Judah.
Ooh.
And Hezekiah, he was the one that brought the water into Jerusalem.
Okay.
So he was the prophet with those 4 kings.
So we can put ourselves in a time bracket, whether or not you follow the kings or not. Isaiah now, we're going to who? Well, the nation of Judah, the people of Israel. And he is a prophet of God. So we're going back to some prophet books here. Some messages from the Lord through a man, right? That's exactly what Isaiah is. That's what his job is. That's what he's doing. And so he delivers, I guess you could call it a series of messages to the people of Israel about their impending judgment from God, right? I mean, sometimes the best sermons are kick in the pants sermons, right? And that's what God is giving to Isaiah to give to the people. And so again, we took a whole nother shift here. Isaiah chapter 1, because we read basically through very end of chapter 5 this week. Isaiah chapter 1, he begins by rebuking the Israelites for their rebellion against God and their false worship. That's a kick in the pants, right? Right out the bat. Chapter 1, he calls them sinful and warns them to repent back to God, or else they're going to receive damnation. I mean, keeping it real. The next few chapters, Isaiah continues to prophesy about God's future glory and how God will reign over the nations. And he prophesies about a time of peace and justice when people will come to God and learn his ways. I think there could be some discussion on that about what time that might be. But also he still warns them about their current situation and how God will judge them for it if they don't get their act back together. Let's see. Yes, I'm kind of alluding. I'm going to see if you guys talk about any pieces here. Again, he spends quite a bit of time here at the beginning talking about their judgment and this time of peace that could come if they turn back to God. I'll let you have some comments here. That time of peace thing, I'm going to let that kind of hang loftily and see if we have any comments on this whole, he's also known as a messianic prophet. What kind of comments do you have in Isaiah? Sure, Nancy.
I was just thinking, I mean, I've heard of Isaiah. I've never really studied Isaiah. I have on that Right Now Media, watched the whole Isaiah thing. And it's a pretty big book.
Yes.
And but we know all about like Elijah and Elisha, and they're just mentioned in Kings and Chronicles, and Elijah taken up in a whirlwind. But here we have Isaiah, who I think came after those two. I think it was Elijah, Elisha, and Isaiah, and we have this big book, and I don't know if Elijah and Elisha had any kind of prophesying about Jesus, but Isaiah has a lot of prophesying about Jesus.
So there's that messianic thing that Terry was alluding to here. This is my favorite thing to do with Old Testament stuff, especially prophets, because now we know, as Paul referred to it, the mystery of God or the mystery of the gospel has been revealed to us, right? And so because we have the mystery of the gospel, that's real churchy terms. What does that mean? We know what God's plan was with Christ. We know what God's plan was with Christ, and now we look back into the prophetic teachings of God through, let's say, Isaiah here, and we're like, oh my goodness, that's about Jesus. That's about Christ, right? And at that time that he's given this to the nation of Israel, they didn't know that. They didn't catch that. They caught what God was trying to tell them at the moment of, you need to turn back to me or things are bad, or if when you're with me, things will be, a time of peace is coming. But they didn't catch that, but we catch that in the Christian age because we know the plan, right? So I think that's really, really cool. Messianic talks about Jesus a lot, right? Isaiah talks about Jesus, and I'm not even sure that, I can guarantee he didn't know the full fulfillment of God's plan in that. He just spoke the words of God, probably not even knowing the full depth of them. Dennis?
Yeah, I'm glad you used that word messianic. And translated in the Greek, it would be called Christian.
Yeah.
other words, talking about the promised Messiah, God's anointed one that comes to save his people from their sins. And so even the Old Testament is packed with, dare I say, Christian literature, because you can honestly call it messianic, and if I understand those two words, they're the very same word. And but it's interesting that as I read these prophets, whether it's Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and the little ones too, God's big prophets and spokesmen, they were incensed at the straying of the Jews, and it wasn't just a point of doctrine. How big does the communion chip have to be? In fact, there was none of those kind of things mentioned. It was about flat out fornication and theft and murder and buggery and bowing to idols, false idols in their own homes and temples, even in the temple. He was talking about serious stuff. I don't think his apostles or prophets, either one, had time to go around. In fact, you get into the so-called New Testament, I don't see Paul went around, he said he's a Pharisee's Pharisee. I never saw him go on a killing spree against Sadducees or Essenes or scribes, but he did against Christians because it was a major problem to him. And I think sometimes we should pick our battles better than some I've seen some of my teachers and preachers in the past have dwelt on.
Because we still have major issues that we got to squash out too, right? I think that's the main thing we still have false idols that we worship, to be honest with you, right? And so we've got the same challenge. When you look at an Old Testament book, sometimes it's easy to be like, all right, this is all just prophesying for those people of old in Israel and Judah, wherever it might be. This doesn't apply to us. But if you look at the points that should be applying to us, they definitely do. Putting away what we're worshiping, filling our temples. I mean, we've got the temple right here, filling our temple with other stuff. And too often, Dennis is right, we spend about 5% talking about those big issues and 95% talking about the shape of the communion bread. Absolutely. Terry's got one up here.
We mentioned that Ecclesiastes says there's nothing new under the sun, and what you were just talking about, filling our lives with things. I wonder how many young non-Christian influencers today would realize that the Bible talks about all their finery, because in Isaiah 3:18 it says God will take away all their finery. And I just had to laugh. I don't know if anybody else did, but it's like bangles and headbands and crescent necklaces and earrings and bracelets and veils and headdresses and ankle chains and sashes and perfume bottles and charms and signet rings and nose rings and fine robes and capes and cloaks and purses and mirrors and linen garments and tiaras and shawls. I mean, he really is specific about the fact that, you know, there really is nothing new under the sun, and we get tied up with things of the world, and here's proof. Because we have all those things, we worry about all those things, and it's just kind of funny that there really is nothing new.
Yeah. So yeah, how would if we modernize this verse of what Isaiah is saying in chapter 3, verse 18? In that day, the Lord will take away all of your finery, including your 401k and your F-350 and your iPhones and your house and your Facebook account and your whatever you want to start listing that would be applicable for today. All those things that we take pride in having worked for, earned, and bought, whatever it might be, that's exactly it might have a different name, it might look a different flavor, but it's not new. Yeah, absolutely. Nancy?
All of those false gods which we've read are real. They are not gods, they are demons. Those demons exist today. They are still here. They have not left. They are still working, trying to get people to follow them. And they are sly.
Yeah. I think we just forget because now there's new tactics at play, right? Same sin, new tactic, new tool. All right, we're about out of time, so we need to talk about 2 Corinthians for just a second. If you notice, we're kind of slowly working through 2 Corinthians, especially when you compare it to where we've been moving through the Old Testament. But there's some good stuff for us to look at in 2 Corinthians as well. Like I said, 1 Corinthians, he's hitting things right on the nose. He's coming about it a little more subtly as in 2 Corinthians, but kind of where we got to this week, we started in chapter 6, about halfway through. Paul is starting to hit some of the things on the head about their issues and challenges that they're facing as the Corinthian church, right? He hits them right off the bat here in chapter 6 and the beginning of chapter 7 about how important righteousness is. Again, another good teaching that we should dwell on because we also have to face that day in and day out. There is a difference between walking in the light and walking in the darkness. There's one or the other. There's idolatry and purity, right? Impurity and purity. And so he's really telling them to focus their hearts on walking in the light and being in Christ. There's a distinct separation there. He talks about Titus a little bit. He talks about how encouraging it is that they're encouraging him, and also he says, don't prove me wrong when I said that you would be this way. He kind of gives them a little, that's almost a parenting move there from Paul. And so that's kind of in chapters 9 and 10. He defends his credibility in chapter 10 as well. And then kind of the last little bit that we read this week, hey guys, that we might get a chance to talk about for a few minutes, is he warns them strongly against false teachers, chapter 11. And we went through verse 15 or so of that this week. False teachers are an important thing for us to acknowledge that still exists to this day, right? We have to be on the lookout for truth when it comes compared to God's word. That's the truth. We have to watch out for false teachers. Any comments on 2 Corinthians? I know they gave you like 4 minutes to talk about it. So, all right, Nancy.
Again, here we are. We're just talking about gods in the Old Testament. Here, Paul's talking about them right here in the New Testament. A couple thousand years later, a couple thousand years ago, and the false teachers. I mean, they exist. So I think sometimes people in the United States we let our guard down.
Oh yeah.
We do, and we are naive, and we really need to look and what's going on, and is this something that is false or not?
Yeah, I love the terminology Paul used. He said, let me think. Don't be led astray by those who appear as apostles of light, but are actually agents of Satan, depending on your version. I was like, ooh, that's good, because we still face some of those false gods, but they can come in the form of men teaching us incorrectly to this very day, right? Yeah. Courtney?
I think Nancy's absolutely right, especially for me personally. Those little snippets on Facebook. But I saw one of those actually, and he kind of called out something that I realized I had slipped into a little bit, that he was like, you are not the main character of the Bible. When you read about David and Goliath, that's not God saying you need to step up to your Goliaths and it's all about you. No, you are the guy with your knees knocking in the corner, and Jesus is the David, in this metaphor, and he's the one who takes down Goliath. Like, you are the scared little kid, and like, you are not the main character. None of this, it applies to you, but you're not the main character. Jesus is always and forever the main character. And that's just, I don't know, it's not about me. And that's something I just keep trying to knock into my head constantly, that it's all about Jesus.
All right, any other comment? Brenda's got one here in the corner. Again, I had to push us through the 2 Corinthians piece. There was a lot this week.
One thing about the false teachers that we don't talk about quite as much is that in that same couple of verses, it talks about Satan being messenger of light or something like that. Angel of light, I think it says. And we don't see, we think that everybody that is teaching the Bible is teaching the truth, but they can distort it, and that's why it's so scary. We have to know the truth, because Satan knows the truth, and he can distort and make it appear to be truth and make it appear to be the light.
I was trying to find it, but you beat me there. Even Satan can disguise himself as an angel of light, or something right along that 11:14. Yeah. Okay, it's right here. And no wonder, for Satan himself masquerades as an angel of light. Yeah, it's not surprising then if his servants also masquerade as servants of righteousness. Their end will be what their actions deserve. Absolutely. Yeah. We forget how deceiving, like Dennis was saying, he walked out, but he is Lucifer. He's a deceiver. He's the father of lies, right? And that's exactly the key that Satan uses on us. All right, we are definitely out of time. So next week we're going to be in Isaiah for a good while. So we're going to be in Isaiah and 2 Corinthians for the next little while. Thank you guys so much for your time and your comments.